Hi, Mbaye Shepa, ¿cómo están? I'm going to talk about Paraguay, the country and the football team who have just played the 2026 World Cup and why they have fought so hard to get where they have. All right, so about 15 years ago, I wrote a little blog about Paraguay, and I received a comment from a Paraguayan woman named Belu, and she writes, I love my country. There's just something about it. It's the air, the sadness, the sacrifice of the working people, but at the same time, that hope, that kindness in the people. And I'll sort of link that to one of the most famous Paraguayan books, which is by Augusto Roa Bastos, and that's called Hijo de Hombre, or Son of Man, which was written in 1960. So, just a very quick summary of that book and why it represents the country so well. So, in the Paraguayan countryside, where people speak Guarani to each other instead of Spanish, people without land or power struggle to rise up and are always defeated by the Paraguayan army. Memories go back to previous campesino revolts, where hope was denied and their best men were killed. Those without anything try again and lose again and again lose. So, the football team has had a very similar trajectory to that book, where they keep trying, they keep trying. The revolts always fall a bit short, um, but they have become relatively famous for them. So, a generation ago, La Selección de Paraguay, the Paraguayan football team, resisted four famous sieges. So, in 1998, they successfully held off Spain, which included Raúl, and they ended the group match 0-0. And Celso Ayala, the Paraguayan defender, did the most awesome defensive clearance you'll ever see. Basically, a tap in for the Spanish player, and Ayala got rid of it on the goal line. Okay, and then two matches later, they had their famous game against France, and their resistance lasted 114 minutes and fell just 6 minutes short of being able to compete on equal footing in a penalty shootout. All right, and then 2002, they get to the second round of the World Cup. Again, they last 88 minutes against Germany, and they lose 1-0. 2010, they go all the way to the quarterfinals, so the last eight countries in the whole world, and lose to Spain, a goal made by Iniesta and scored by David Villa. So they lasted 83 minutes, and they were one of the hardest. So all three of those countries were good enough to reach the World Cup final, and France and Spain became world champions. But they found Paraguay a very difficult prospect. So the poetry of the 2026 competition is that um, this generation, Orlando Gil and all the rest of them, they completed the work of what the previous generations just fell short of achieving. So they scored in the second minute and held on against Turkey. They successfully reached the end of their match against Germany and won the penalty shootout. And the resistance against France also lasted 70 minutes. Okay, so there's been a bit of a pile on from the rest of the world. Maybe not so much Latin America, but the rest of the world has piled on Paraguay ever since the France game. Um, but they their modus operandi is to fight, basically, to prove that they exist, to prove that they survive. It's not necessarily to entertain anyone. So I'll give you two examples. A lot of their individual stories are quite terrible. So I'll give you I'll give you two examples. So the famous goalie Orlando Gil, who saved two German penalties. So an article has just come out that he sold recently, about 5 or 6 years ago. He had a baby boy who was prematurely born, and he basically had to sell everything just to finance keeping his baby alive. Then his mother died, then his uncle died. It just all unfortunately happened for him. One generation ago, there was a player named Nelson Aedo Valdez. He was the player that scored the disallowed goal in the quarterfinal against Spain in 2010. So his story is that he came from the Paraguayan countryside, and he spent 2 years sleeping under a stairwell at his first club in the capital, Asuncion. And he didn't even tell his parents, apparently, that he was doing that because back home they themselves had their problems. He didn't want to bother them. So these are the sorts of things that these players have had to do to survive in the world, to become football players. So the most famous English language commentator of South American football is named Tim Vickery, an English fellow. And he recently remarked that for countries like Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay, um, it's about proving that they exist. They want to show the world that they exist because otherwise no one would think about them, no one would talk about them. But even Kylian Mbappe, in very unfortunate circumstances, which I don't think it's my job to address here. So obviously Mbappe hated them on the day, but afterwards he labeled their trajectory with these words: that country which has sweated passion and honor throughout the competition, their journey and the historic effort your players accomplished during this World Cup. So even though they have messed with him quite a lot, he still has a bit of regard for what they have been able to achieve coming from such difficult circumstances. So Paraguay, the country, and the football team, they're not really about playing awesome. They're not really about providing entertainment to first world audiences. They're not even about necessarily keeping the game 100% clean, although they try to be clean for the most part, except for very recently. Um, so they're about surviving. They're about proving that they're still here. So despite the genocide, the slaughter of the Triple Alianza War, the Triple Alliance War, they're still here. Despite so their language Guarani is still strong despite not being a famous international language, and their team has still advanced 2 rounds in this current World Cup, and they've also done the same in other World Cups in recent memory, despite the siege of Turkey, despite the Germany siege, and despite pissing off everyone else in the world. So Paraguay are not about scoring a million goals like Mbappe. They're not about entertaining people. They are about continuing again and again, even though everything around you is so, so hard.